Hello, noble ones. Welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking. And man, I found a video and I heard it's quite controversial. And you know me, if something is controversial, I'm all over it. So the video in question is called Racial Egalitarianism, All Arguments Ranked and Debunked from Basic Logic. And as we look at the video description for further information, the West is told that all groups are fundamentally equal in cognitive ability, behavior, and potential. When disparities appear in income, crime, education, and achievement, the explanations are always discrimination or culture. But what if group differences have deeper roots? In this video, I rank and debunk the most popular arguments for blank state ideology, from race is a social construct and 99.9% genetic similarity to IQ test bias, culture explanation, and environmental determinism, using evidence from twin studies, adoption research, including the Minnesota Transracial Adoption Study, heritability data, and evolutionary biology. We examine why outcomes differ even when environments are equalized. And then there is a disclaimer. I do appreciate the disclaimer. It says this discusses group statistical patterns, not individuals. Exceptions exist in every group. Of course, I mean, that's a good thing to say. Now, obviously, you can immediately figure out why addressing this topic can be controversial to a point where people could be literally terrified to even look at the data, let alone talk about it. Personally, I always say, let the data speak. The truth is all that matters. So let's have a look. Let's see what he brings to the table. Without further ado.
The West is racist. That's what mainstream leftism has been saying for decades.
Right.
Why else would there be such great disparities in income, crime rates, etc. between racial groups?
Within the first 10 seconds, I see that the approach is political. Now, when any presentation has a political nature, and doesn't automatically mean that the information is going to be wrong, but there might be a bias, and we have to be cognizant about it.
In their worldview, all racial groups and cultures are equal.
Right.
Therefore, all disparities can only be explained by discrimination.
I think that depends on what left-winger you're talking about, because some of the most radical ones think that white people are inferior. But that's a different situation.
And for just as long, the mainstream right has been counter-arguing that culture explains all disparities.
Aha, I see. So interesting. So he's addressing both left-wing and right-wing positions, which he believed to be incorrect based on his data research. Okay, cool.
In their worldview, some racial groups, completely randomly, adopted cultures that sabotage themselves. For them, culture is the root cause. Any racial group could theoretically adopt a culture that has worked for any other group and improve themselves. And for that reason, all could theoretically assimilate anywhere. Both of these worldviews are nonsensical.
Okay.
Obviously, discrimination isn't the only factor, and culture clearly matters. But just as obvious, a people's culture is not random. It's the product of the people who create and sustain it.
So culture is the product of the people that create and sustain it. Right, but people react to the environment, and the environment oftentimes presents random pressures. So I don't know if he's going to go 100% the genetic route, but I don't want to straw man him, so let's see.
And isn't there a more obvious root cause to consider? That perhaps different groups are innately different and thus have different outcomes, even in the absence of outside forces?
Okay.
When studying group disparities, why don't we examine the groups themselves? You already know why. Because in our modern society, one of the most sacred dogmas is racial egalitarianism.
Right.
The belief that all racial groups are fundamentally the same.
I mean, it is false that all racial groups are fundamentally the same, in as long as we're not talking about individual human value. What I mean by that personally is that I think it's perfectly fine to say that at a physical level and at a biological level, some groups excel at some things and other groups excel at other things because of the outside pressures and forces that have shaped them into the way they are, and because of their history and geography and all the rest, right? I think that's normal to think. The value of a human life remains equal in my eyes. For instance, you take a child of any race, then the value of that innocent human life is equal in the entire spectrum. Okay.
Which is precisely why in this video, I'll be ranking and debunking all arguments for racial egalitarianism, and then putting them on a tier list. If you enjoyed, consider subscribing. It helps the channel. A quick disclaimer. Since this entire debate exists because of the collective disparities between entire groups, we'll therefore be dealing with collective group averages.
Of course.
Therefore, the existence of exceptional individuals of any group isn't relevant, as they are precisely that, exceptions.
Yeah.
If you're the kind of person who accuses other groups collectively when it suits you, but then accuse others of racism if they don't treat members of your group as individuals, you can click off.
Exactly.
Intelligence is not genetically linked. This obviously false statement is a necessary act of mental gymnastics for the purely socioeconomic factors crowd. Because intelligence is heritable, as shown from twin and adoption studies, it's completely within reason to say that certain groups have selected for it more than others. In fact, if you agree with evolution, then you must concede this. How else would humans have evolved intelligence? Some dog breeds are obviously smarter than other dog breeds. The Border Collie and Chihuahua are both the same species, yet differ greatly in intellect and trainability.
Okay, but I think at this point we need to figure out how we define intelligence per se. Because, I mean, one of the areas that you are showing here is the IQ. But IQ is not the best way to represent intelligence for what it is, because intelligence is a multifaceted aspect that is not entirely described with IQ only. For instance, creative intelligence, analytical intelligence, linguistic intelligence. I mean, oftentimes, if you think about it, we say someone is smart because they know a lot of facts, but that is memory. And it is a completely different space of intelligence. Still part of it, if you want. I like that he tackled this topic. I very much do, because it pisses me off when people do not want to concede that data is facts. And once facts exist, you can't ignore them. Look at, for example, crime data statistics. Like, nobody cares that you're going to use buzzwords and accuse people of being racist because you don't want us to look at data. No, data exists, it's real, and we need to be adult enough to look at it without, of course, attacking single individuals because of group statistics. In other words, don't include innocents with the guilty, but do be cognizant of real statistics and per capita. But personally, if I had to tackle this, I would first try to define what I mean by intelligence exactly, because it is ambiguous, which makes it easy to manipulate. I'm not saying that he's trying to do that, but let's see, maybe he will expand into this.
Should we expect that a Chihuahua would yet differ greatly in intellect and trainability? Should we expect that a Chihuahua would do as well as a Border Collie? Is it purely socioeconomic factors and anti-Chihuahua racism that makes them a minority in working dog roles? NPC tier. Humans are genetically 99.9% identical.
Right.
You share half of your genes with a banana.
Yeah.
90% of your DNA sequence is shared with your cat. Quantitative similarities between genetic content does not equal qualitative differences.
Yeah, but are there really people that use that as a way to say we're all the same? The 99.9% argument, it exists?
That 0.1%
it's
matters.
massive, of course.
Did you know that gray wolves are 99.9% identical to domestic dogs?
Right.
In fact, they only diverged from each other about 20 to 30,000 years ago, which is significantly shorter than the divergence between some human groups. But obviously that doesn't mean it's okay to bring a gray wolf to the dog park. If gray wolves on average end up being more aggressive than dogs, solely blaming it on just socioeconomic factors like dog trait disparities seems a little silly. Because remember, aggression, impulse control, personality traits are all also genetically linked.
Right.
NPC tier. There is more intragroup variance than intergroup. This claim says that the genetic difference between one randomly selected person in the village and another randomly selected person in the same village is greater than the genetic difference between the average person of one race and the average person of another. Therefore, race is inconsequential. The premise is true, but there's a flaw in this logic. Not all genes are made equal. Most random genetic variance between people doesn't matter. But some specific genes matter so much that practically the entire group adapted to have those genes and are often defined by it. For example, the Duffy negative mutation, which is found in 95 to 100% of West and Central Africans, makes them immune to malaria. But 0% of those without African blood have it. Or the Tibetans EPAS1, which allows them to survive in high altitudes where oxygen is reduced by about 40%.
That is so cool, by the way. As I say, I think when we look at physical differences like this, and maybe even averages in athleticism or that kind of stuff, they don't make us go like, oh, I don't want to talk about that. Oh, not me. I mean, I'm happy to talk about everything. But I think in general, when it comes to why something becomes taboo, It is this over-aggressive competition that is now characterized the racial discourse because of politics these days that is absolutely insane. It's just anything becomes like, what do you mean by that? What are you trying to say? How about just look at the data and be neutral about it?
Which occurs for them about 90% of the time, but 0% for Africans and Europeans.
Okay.
Or the ABCC11 gene that makes 80 to 95% of East Asians have no sweat odor, but again, practically non-existent elsewhere. This becomes even more complex when it comes to traits that are influenced by multiple genes. We haven't fully isolated the genes that are responsible for intelligence or personality, yet we do know both are genetically linked. And I think we can both agree that social cohesion caused by similarities in intellect and character is vastly more important to survival than odorless sweat.
Well, yeah, of course.
Flop tier. Race is a social construct.
Right.
Nowadays, whenever a leftist says X is a social construct, you should just interpret that as code for I have no counter to this observable aspect of reality.
That'd be true.
It's not an argument, it's just wordplay. What does social construct even mean anymore? Anything that humans have a socialized concept for? By that logic, everything is a social construct. The sun, the earth, molecules, everything has a socialized concept.
It's a little weak, this one. I mean, they piss me off too, okay? They do piss me off when they go into social construct. I mean, they say gender is a social construct. They say race is a social construct. I think they mean things that we create. But it is a weak argument on their side, because you could say language is a social construct, but the organs and morphology, the way we create language, is real and physical. But the concept of language could be in the mouth positions, in fact, the very waves of sound that we produce, we vibrate or not, depending on the sound, of vocal cords, all of that exists in physical reality, so that is not a social construct. However, perhaps the idea that I call this a phone, well, that is a social construct, not the phone, but the arbitrary decision that this combination of sounds is what we decide to attribute to the physical concept of phone. I'm just trying to steelman an argument that in general I disagree with, but I'm just trying to be honest with the definition of it. Likewise, the physical aspect of money, so the paper, the banknotes or bills, the coins, all of that is real and physical. That's not a social construct, but the concept of money, the value we give it, that is a social construct. So maybe that's one way. So when we look at race has absolutely a biological and genetic component. But when we divide people into groups, white people, black people, that can be considered partially a social construct, because the borders, the boundaries are as arbitrary as it gets. Also considering the immense phenotypic variance within these very groups that we create.
Except, as proven by the fact that I can name them and you know what I'm talking about. The fact that we have a social construct surrounding any aspect of reality does not mean that aspect of reality is made up.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, totally. There is a real biological, physical foundation over which we build upon.
In fact, we build social constructs around real things out of necessity.
Right.
Abyss tier. IQ tests are unreliable. For many decades, race egalitarians have had to deal with the world IQ map, which showed interesting patterns between IQ score and identity. Their only rebuttal has been either that IQ is not meaningfully influenced by genetics, which is demonstrably false, and that IQ has issues. I don't contest the latter.
Yeah, because I also say that we have to see how we identify IQ, or how we connect it to intelligence specifically. Like what type of intelligence? Because someone could be extremely intelligent and not do well at that IQ test because their version of intelligence shines on other aspects.
But that's the best we've got. IQ has issues. I don't contest the latter, but that's the best we've got. IQ is the best predictor of success that we have, even more so than being born rich. Some then argue that IQ in reality should be used as a predictor of success in Western society, rather than intelligence. Fine then. If IQ is a reliable metric for success in Western society, then naturally those with low IQ will not do well in Western society. And therefore, we should not be importing them. Nor should we expect low IQ groups to have similar outcomes to high IQ groups, even in the absence of discrimination. Since IQ is so
Let me listen to that one again, because I think now we're talking about immigration.
we should not be importing them. low IQ will not do well in Western society.
So people with low IQ will not do well in Western society. Well, if you want to look at, I mean, I'm a huge proponent of, I'm very much against illegal immigration, and I think the people that say a borderless state or free flow of people are a bunch of lunatics. With that being said, when we look at well-structured legal immigration within the confines and budgets, for instance, of a country, no overflow, of course, I'm not sure I would use necessarily IQ. I would use IQ for those situations that are necessarily and inherently meritocratic. So if you come into work, but I don't want you because I've got people who are better than you because they have a higher IQ or better curriculum experience and whatnot, then I would agree. Yeah, don't import low IQ as workforce unless the kind of jobs that they need to do not require a high IQ. I think in that situation we will have to discuss demand and requirement. It's a situational variant, but when it comes to university study, yeah, of course, get students with scholarships, for instance, because they have already proven that they are valuable to our society. But I wouldn't put a ban on low IQ necessarily unless there is a reason. So, for instance, do the background checks. If the violent history, yeah, they're not welcome here. Absolutely. Check the freaking social media and see what they say. Because I hate America, death to America, you can stay out. But if it's someone who's like getting married, then I don't care if they have high or low IQ. It's whatever. I mean, if they're getting married with a local and the local wants them here, everything is legal, it doesn't matter. It's not my problem at that point. Personally.
And therefore, we should not be importing them. Nor should we expect low IQ groups to have similar outcomes to high IQ groups,
of course,
even in the absence of discrimination. Since IQ is so artificially advantageous in the West, let those of low IQ thrive in other societies. Why do they insist on coming into our ones where those suffer?
Well, I think why they insist is because the West is thriving. The West is the best place where to live. It's a fact. The West there is more freedom, there is more opportunity, particularly when you compare it to some freaking theocratic Islamic hellhole when people are not free to do anything. I'm saying the worst places. Before you come in the comments and say, no, but I come from a country where it's mostly majority, but we are not like the others. Okay, I'm talking about the ones that we know exactly what we're talking about. Or like if you come from a place that is extremely poor, I suppose coming to the West will allow you to earn wages that you would never dream of in the place of your origin. So I think that's the reason why they come to the West. But the problem is that if they do so, then they should come and assimilate, respect, and not hate us. And of course, if they commit crimes, kick them out.
The reason is because there are no societies where high IQ isn't advantageous. NPC tier. Culture fully explains disparities.
So that's the right-wing position, is it?
This is everyone's favorite cope when they don't agree that the West is discriminating against certain groups, but don't want to give leftist reasons to call them racist. Here's the thing, you're going to be called racist regardless when you
Well, yeah, of course, who cares?
disagree, so you might as well be honest. Why do some groups adopt or create certain cultures more readily than others? Both genes and culture obviously have an effect on each other.
Right.
Genetics
and history
influence what culture you're most innately compatible with, and culture works as a form of selection. But which came first, genetics or culture? This isn't a philosophic question. Genes obviously predate culture. Culture is a product of a people, not the cause of it.
Not just the people, though. It's the people, the environment, the countries around, the wars. All of that shapes the way cultures develop. I'm not trying to be difficult, but I just want to make sure things are not left out.
Even if there is a feedback loop, just because a culture works for one group of people doesn't mean it works for all.
Okay, yeah, but in general, culture is the explanation for everything is incorrect. I agree with that, of course.
Abyss tier. Different groups are different for a reason. They adapted to survive in their own unique circumstances. The expectation that you can transplant the people from one part of the world into another, and that they'll integrate and perform at identical levels to anyone else, is a delusion rooted in the routinely debunked blank slate ideology. An ideology perpetuated solely by the fear of being labeled racist.
Yeah.
That concludes the tier list.
That is the damage that we're getting. Everyone is so scared. I mean, just have some spine, stand up. You know,
if there are any other arguments you'd like to see addressed, please share them in the comments below.
Okay, so I mean, in general, it's an 8-minute video, so it's not like you can expect it to go in the extreme depth. Personally, this is the way I see it. And then we're going to jump onto two more shorter videos, one from Joe Rogan and one from Lex Fridman, that also address this topic. Because the reality is this: I think we have come to a point where we are accustomed to the idea of we care about social points. We were scared. We don't want to get people mad at us. I do not understand that. What about the truth? If data showed, I'm a Sicilian, right? If data showed, someone came to me and said, oh, we did a massive test, a massive research, and the ends of this research tell us who are the most gifted, intelligent, athletically prone, all of that among 5 groups, one of which is Sicilians. I would want to know the truth. So, of course, if someone came to me and said Sicilians dominated on everything, the most intelligent, beautiful, handsome, whatever you like, I'd be like, okay, cool, wow. But if someone told me, oh, no, actually, Sicilians on average had lower IQ than Nordic people, Africans, Asians, do you think I would call you race? I wouldn't dream of it. What I would think is like, oh, that sucks. But I mean, if that's what the data says, that's what the data says. Because the truth doesn't care about my feelings now, does it? And that's the reality. I think that there are forces. If a series of studies demonstrated that on average, white people are more intelligent than black people, although then again, we need to see how we bracket black and white, like who are you introducing in white, because that's been changing a lot, particularly when it comes to like police reports and Hispanics are white. But what about like, are you only talking about West Germanic, or are you including all white Europeans? Are we including the Slavs or no? So there is a lot, like, what do you mean by white, if you know what I mean? And even with black, it's a similar situation. Which groups are you including? And if you were to remove the least performing groups among those, then would that change the statistics? Like, that's why it's like we're going to sit down and look at the data here. But imagine if someone did come out with that and said, hey, look, on average, white people are more intelligent than black people. The left would burn you to the ground. And of course, there would be individuals on the right that would take that and use it to show off their superiority, racial superiority. Likewise, however, if the thing was the other way around, and you had data that actually showed, no, black people are more intelligent than white people on average, the left would love it. They would publish it everywhere, and it's true. And there would be people on the right that would go absolutely ballistic over it. But here is my question. Here is what I would do. Whenever something like that came out, I would first question the source. Who is doing this research? And is there a reason behind it? Are they trying to push a message? Is this propaganda? After having verified the source and be like, no, the source is fine. The source is fine. Then I would look at the data. And after analysis, if the data is real, the data is real. It doesn't matter. I just want to know the truth. And I hate that we live in a society, so he's right about that. We live in a society where you're not supposed to believe, you're supposed to hide facts if they are deemed taboo. I find that unacceptable.
What do we know about, from that book and the research beyond, about race differences and intelligence?
It's still the most incendiary topic in psychology. Nothing has changed that. Anybody who even discusses it is easily called a racist just for discussing it.
This is ridiculous.
It's become fashionable to find racism in any discussion like this. It's unfortunate.
Yeah.
The short answer to your question is there's been very little actual research on this topic since
since the bell curve.
Since the bell curve, even before. This really became incendiary in 1969 with an article published by an educational psychologist named Arthur Jensen.
Man, can you imagine? So the research is not there because it has become taboo, so you can't even do the research, even if it could be a way to help.
Let's just take a minute and go back to that to see the bell curve in a little bit more historical perspective. Arthur Jensen was a educational psychologist at UC Berkeley. I knew him as well. And in 1969 or 68, the Harvard Educational Review asked him to do a review article on the early childhood education programs that were designed to raise the IQs of minority students.
I wonder why they asked a psychologist and not a geneticist at this point, or some other types of educators in combination with a geneticist, if that's where we're going. A psychologist? Would you ask a psychologist about that?
This was before the federally funded Head Start program. Head Start had not really gotten underway at the time Jensen undertook his review of what were a number of demonstration programs. And these demonstration programs were for young children around kindergarten age, and they were specially designed to be cognitively stimulating, to provide lunches, do all the things that people thought would minimize this average gap of intelligence tests. Right. There was a strong belief among virtually all psychologists that the cause of the gap was unequal opportunity due to racism, due to all...
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me, honestly. It's free psychology.
All negative things in the society. And if you could compensate for this, the gap would go away. So early childhood education back then was called literally compensatory education. Jensen looked at these programs. He was an empirical guy. He understood psychometrics. And he wrote it was over 100-page article detailing these programs and the flaws in their research design. Some of the programs reported IQ gains of, on average, 5 points, but a few reported 10, 20, and even 30-point gains.
30-point gain? You see, that's what I mean. How are they even calculating that?
One was called the Miracle in Milwaukee. That investigator went to jail ultimately for fabricating data.
Can you imagine that? Like, how much of a scumbag do you have to be to fabricate data? You're a propagandist at that point.
But the point is that Jensen wrote an article that said, look, the opening sentence of his article is classic. The opening sentence is, I may not quote it exactly right, but it's, we have tried compensatory education and it has failed. And he showed that these gains were essentially nothing. You couldn't really document empirically any gains at all from these really earnest efforts to increase IQ. But he went a step further.
I think rather than trying to increase IQ, whatever that means, why don't you try to create applicable gains through skills? Like teaching languages, but I don't know, like with the advent of AI, I don't know where the language space is going to go in 20 or 30 years, but, to produce people that can actually understand when they're very young and prone to learning, regardless of average IQ at that point. Like, of course, people with higher IQ will excel, but in general, you could try to teach based on IQ skills that can be useful. So if you have a kid with super high IQ, then teach them coding. And if you have a kid with a lower IQ, teach them something manual, a skill, though, that is very useful and can guarantee a good outcome and, maybe a good income in the future. Doesn't that make more sense? It does to me.
A fateful step further. He said, not only have these efforts failed, but because they have had essentially no impact, we have to re-examine our assumption that these differences are caused by environmental things that we can address with education. We need to consider a genetic influence.
Oh my gosh, probably burnt him at the stake for that sentence.
There's a genetic influence on this group difference.
So you said that this is one of the more controversial works.
I think it's the most infamous paper in all of psychology, I would go on to say. Because in 1969, the genetic data was very skimpy on this question. Skimpy and controversial. It's always been controversial, but it was even skimpy and controversial. It's kind of a long story that I go into a little bit in more detail in the book Neuroscience.
I'm sorry, talking about IQ, I need to Google what skimpy means. Skimpy meaning, I never heard that word before. lacking in size, amount of material, describes something that is too small, short, or not large. Man, 100 pages. Not large enough to fully adequate or satisfying. Well, I guess it's a very high, complex topic. Still 100 pages, goodness gracious. Skimpy.
Science of intelligence. But to say he was vilified is an understatement. I mean, he couldn't talk at the American Psychological Association without bomb threats clearing the lecture hall.
Yeah, the tolerant people are back at it again.
Campus security watched him all the time. They opened his mail. He had to retreat to a different address. This was one of the earliest kinds. This was before the internet and kind of internet social media mobs, but it was that intense. And I have written that overnight, after the publication of this article, all intelligence research became radioactive. Nobody wanted to talk about it.
Well, of course, because they're afraid of the consequences, which it's an excellent way to block scientific development.
And then nobody was doing more research. And then the bell curve came along, and the Jensen controversy was dying down. I have stories that Jensen told me about his interaction with the Nixon White House on this issue.
Oh, wow.
I mean, this was like a really big deal.
That's insane. Joe Rogan, the racial differences in intelligence debate, 4 minutes. Let's see.
So this question of intelligence is really interesting and I think very important because, we talk about intelligence as if we know what it is, but we don't. It expresses itself in so many different ways. There's so many manifestations. So this big controversy that's happening now among, between, I don't know if you're aware, this was Sam Harris and Ezra Klein and Andrew Sullivan, and people are
and Charles Murray.
Charles Murray, right? Yeah. Exactly. That whole thing about racial.
Explain it to people that don't know what the hell it is.
So Charles Murray wrote this book called The Bell Curve. I don't know, 20 years ago or something.
I think it was 25 even.
Yeah, where he argued that there are racial differences in intelligence.
Right.
IQ specifically, with Asians being the highest and then whites and then blacks, and that's just the way it is, and social adjustments aren't going to change that because it's largely genetic.
Right.
And, that's, as I understand, that was the argument. I haven't read his book.
I don't think it's saying largely genetic, but I think they're saying that genetics play a factor and environment plays a factor. I think some people are not willing to look at genetics if it shows an unfavorable trait in minorities.
Right.
They don't want to look at it.
It's the same thing that happens. I haven't vetted the text, so I don't know if this book is bullshit or if the book is real and based and they're just hiding it.
Trait in minorities. They don't want to look at it.
It's as I was saying, it reminds me of crime statistics. People don't want to look at crime statistics. Why? What's wrong with telling the truth? For instance, we can look at religion once again. If I tell you, let's try this thought experiment very quickly. If I tell you there is a Buddhist, a Taoist, a Muslim, and a Christian in a room, who do you think is more likely to be violent? And an actual terrorist who's going to blow up the rest. The reality is that there will be people that will tell you, no, I don't know, I can't tell, so I'm not going to say it. I can't tell. And in fact, if you do say what you think, then they will call you a racist and whatnot. Even though, religion isn't a race, but whatever. You know how you address people like that? You need to put them in an hypothetical scenario. The hypothetical scenario is there is a Muslim, a Christian, a Taoist, and a Buddhist in a room with your family. If you correctly identify which one of these is actually the terrorist, your family will be spared. If you guess wrong, your family is dead. I guarantee that everyone is going to say the Muslim. Then everyone is going to say the Muslim. Now, does that mean that every Muslim is a terrorist? No, obviously not. But are we going to hide the fact that I personally don't remember the last time that a Taoist flew planes inside buildings or screamed something and then started stabbing people? Statistics are real. If people watching this, if you're a Muslim and you take issue with what I'm saying, you shouldn't take issue with me. You should take issue with radical Muslims, and you should call them out so that they stop misrepresenting your religion if that's the way you feel. By attacking me and calling me Islamophobic, you are not defending your religion. Instead, speak up. Do it. Condemn every single radical Muslim, particularly the ones that come to the West and start attacking women and children in the name of your religion.
Yeah,
They deny
that's
it.
true. But I think it's also true that part of the argument is that social programs are a waste of money because they're not going to affect it because it's genetic.
That's crazy.
I'm
If that
pretty
is
sure
part of the
that's-
argument, that's just straight racist to me.
Well, I think that
I don't know if it would be racist. I think it depends on who says it. But at the end of the day, I'm not even interested in whether or not the argument is racist. I'm saying, but no, the social programs can be used to help people regardless of whether or not. And then we just need to keep an eye on certain individuals if they have a history.
that's what people are.
The idea like save your
Grabbing
money,
onto.
save your money. No,
Right.
do a better job. Like you don't even know
Yeah.
if it works because
Right.
what have you done? Like what?
Well,
go to an
yeah.
inner city school
Right.
and pretend you're a 10-year-old kid trying to get by in this life, and
Yeah.
you're literally
Yeah.
seeing gang members and craziness and people flashing cash and people dropping out because they're pregnant when they're 13th, and you're trying to tell me there's not some sort of a massive environmental factor. If
It is an environmental factor.
you were a
yeah.
white kid
Yeah.
going to a school like that. I only went to a bad school for 1 year of my life. I'm no OG, but I really did go to one bad school, Mary Curley Middle School in Jamaica Plain. And in Jamaica Plain, Massachusetts, now it's become gentrified, sort of. It's kind of like East LA or Silver Lake area. You know, like a lot of hipsters have moved in and nice places. But when I lived there, it was not good.
Yeah.
It was very poor people, and the fucking middle school was scary. It was 17-year-old kids in my 7th grade class. No one. It was just a weird place. Maybe I guess it was 8th grade, but. The point was, these kids were never going to graduate. They knew it, and they were trying to go back to 7th grade again or 8th grade, whatever the fuck it was. And the teacher would have them in the class for a couple days, and then they would leave. And everywhere you walked, you were scared.
Of course.
Everywhere you walked, like some weird shit was happening with people. People were yelling at people. There was always like tension, and there was always like bigger kids around that were robbing other kids. Like,
Yeah.
fuck. Like, I got through that year going, holy shit. And when I got out of there, my parents moved. We moved to a really nice part of town, Newton. But if you're a kid growing up in that environment, good fucking luck learning anything. Good fucking
and
luck
probably
having...
it's pretty bad at home too.
Yeah, and what I
Yeah.
experienced in Jamaica Plain was nothing compared to Dorchester and Roxbury. Those are the bad areas.
Yeah.
They were way worse.
And we
at the
know
time.
that anxiety, stress stops brain development.
Yes.
It retards
Yes,
it. you
it
know?
also makes people much more inclined to violence.
Yeah.
You know, like
Sure.
when you grow up even in the womb, if your mother's around horrible situations and people screaming and fighting and that cortisol.
I wonder how if this is medically confirmed, but this is a clip from 8 years ago. Well, anyways, due to the fact that it is a topic that people are too scared to talk about, I do appreciate the video that we watched. A little short, of course. It's an 8-minute video. It's not like I was expecting this deep analysis. But definitely the one thing that I do appreciate is that people should be willing to talk about things, even if they're controversial, and then we can discuss whether they're right or wrong. But if you are going to be in the comments, how dare you platform such a racist? How do you know he's racist? We have to put us in a societal position before we even talk about general intelligence, about IQ, how we measure intelligence, how we divide it by groups. Before we even do that, we need to get away and stop the situation of accusing people of being racist without overwhelming evidence. Just because something looks, or maybe, do you think... If you think that that's enough to then allow you to call someone racist, you are the problem. And that's where we are. If you appreciate my content so far and wish to help ensure my ability to continue to tell it how it is, regardless of any possible backlash, please support this channel on Patreon. Any support helps me and my team of academics keep the channel strong and gives us the means to fight back against the political rewriting of history. Stand with us, form the wall, defend the truth.